Let's talk about Nekojima and Tokyo Highway Rainbow City. Two dexterity games, but which is better? Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald. In this episode, we're going to talk about two games, not one, two dexterity games that were recent releases. These are not review copies. I actually picked one up on Kickstarter, and the other one I ordered from my local game store. We're talking about Nekojima, which comes from Unfriendly Games. Let me get this right side up. Nekojima is a game for between 1 and 5 players, so there are solo rules. Kids age 7 and up can figure out this game. It's pretty straightforward, and games take only about 15 minutes, but could be a little longer depending on which variant rules you use. Tokyo Highway Rainbow City is the one that I picked up on Kickstarter. This one's from Itten Games. And Tokyo Highway is a game for between 2 and 4 players. Kids age 8 and up can figure this one out. And games last 30 to maybe 40 or 45 minutes, depending on whether you play with missions. So there's variant rules for both of these games, but let's take a deeper look at Nekojima by Unfriendly Games and Tokyo Highway Rainbow City from Itten. There's not a lot of space here on the table, so everything's kind of crowded together. I've got Nekojima on this side. Components for Tokyo Highway are over here. You can't see those quite as well, but they are very large, so I'll hold things up when we're talking about them as we go through the game. These are both light games. Nekojima, I think, is lighter and more straightforward. This is a stacking and balancing game versus Tokyo Highway, which is still light, but there's much more planning, resource management. You're trying to accomplish those missions. So it is more complex than the other game. Like I said, there are variant rules. When we're talking about Nekojima, what are you trying to do? How do you win this game? Well, if you're playing competitively, you just want to be the player who does not knock the tower down. That's the player who loses and everyone else wins if the tower gets knocked over. But you can play it cooperatively, and any way that you play the game. Each turn you're going to be drawing a cube, and I'll talk about that when we get to the gameplay, but you've got this little score chart that keeps track of the difficulty level of the game. This isn't victory points. Each turn you're taking a cube and you're placing it on here until the tower gets knocked over so that you can see how far you made it in terms of how many pieces you stacked. So this, I think, is a really neat addition to these stacking games because you get an idea of how good you are as you play through it. Tokyo Highway is a bit of a different beast. It is more complex. What are you trying to do in Tokyo Highway? Well, if you're playing with missions, you want to be the player who earns the most victory points, and you're going to put your cars on this little highway and drive it along as you get more points by accomplishing missions. Those missions might be things like making an off-ramp onto an airport, for example. There is a nice mission chart that helps to keep track of everything. This is a fold-out piece that can go nearby where you're playing the game, and this just reminds you of the different missions that you're trying to accomplish. Without the missions, so with the missions you're trying to earn the most victory points by the end of the game. Without the missions, you're just trying to place all of your vehicles on roads as you play through, and the first person to do that is going to be the winner. How do you play these games? Well, let's start with Nekojima. You've got these pieces, these poles with their power lines, these power lines between them. They're called denchu. I don't know if I'm pronouncing anything right when I'm talking about this game, but Denchuu is how it's spelled in the rule book. These are denchu, and what you're trying to do is place these on the board. You begin your turn by rolling 2 dice, and these 2 dice are going to dictate where you're going to place the 2 power poles that you're picking up. So there are multiple colors. There's red and blue and white. So you're going to roll these dice. Most of the faces are just a color that matches a color on the base that you're placing these things on. You might get a wild card, or you might get a little knife, in which case another player gets to decide where you're going to place your denchu. The rules are you can't touch these wires as you're playing. You can only manipulate them by turning the poles around. When you're placing additional poles on the board, you can't have wires that are touching at the end of your turn. You can't wrap a wire around a pole to make it shorter. You can't put the poles upside down or stack the pole on top of itself. So there are a number of different rules that you have to pay attention to in this game. You're going to roll the dice. Before you place your denshu, though, you're going to draw a cube from this bag. That's going to dictate which denshu you get to pick. So in this case, I wouldn't take a blue. I would have to take a white. And each color has a bunch of different lengths of wires and heights of poles, and you can pick whichever one you want as long as it matches the color of the cube that you drew out of the bag. So I might place something like this on red and green, and then I get to put my cube on that score chart, like I said, that shows how difficult the game is becoming. There are some black cubes in that bag too. And the black cubes, what they mean is that you're going to have to, at some point, place a cat. And these cats are, there are a number of different black cats. I guess it's Halloween season, so black cats are in season for sure. They're different sizes and they have different shapes, so there's a number of different ways that you can hook them onto the wires. But if I draw a black cube first, then I get to draw another cube to figure out which denshu I'm going to place. If I'm playing cooperatively, I've got to take that black cube and I've got to place a cat on here so that it does not touch the board. If, though, I'm playing competitively, that black cube I can give to another player, and that means on their turn, they're going to have to place a cat. So that certainly does give you a little bit of take that in the game. You're trying to get the other players to knock things down, and boy, you don't want to have to place this cat if you don't have to. There are a bunch of variants. We're not just talking about, for Nekojima, we're not just talking about co-op versus competitive. There's skyscraper mode, and in skyscraper mode, you're only allowed to have two denshu touching the base in each zone. So once there's two on here, I've got to start stacking them higher and higher. There's an urban jungle mode where you're not allowed to stack your denshu higher than two, and in that case, you're going to put a little bird's nest on top of the stack. So once I place a second one on top of here, it gets a bird's nest on top of it to show that you can't stack anything higher. That's going to create a really crowded board and make placement quite difficult, very challenging for sure. And then there's duo mode where you play as a team. And that's a neat mode too, because if you're playing as a two-person team, one person is going to hold each pole of the denshu and place it. So your team you're playing your turn simultaneously with one player holding one side and the other player holding the other, and you're trying to balance it and stack it up. So there's lots of fun ways to play Nekojima. In Tokyo Highway, well, each player is going to begin by placing an on-ramp, and that means you're going to take one of these columns, you put a road on top of it, and a car goes on top of that. That allows everyone to identify whose road is whose. Before you start placing roads, everyone is going to take turns placing these features in the city. So these are going to be around the table. There's a whole bunch of different ones, and this is the Kickstarter version of the game, so I do have some extra pieces here that maybe aren't going to be in the retail game. They've got a wooden base, and the wooden kind of meeple pieces stick into the bottom. But these are important, these details are important in terms of the missions and earning points. Once you've got your on-ramps on there, each player will take a turn. They'll place one of these features of the city, and then you start placing roads. How do you do that? Well, you create a column first, and the way that the roads attach is that they have to be one higher or one lower than the road that you're attaching it to. So I could place, I'll put it over here on the Nekojima side. I could place a road something like this. So I have to be touching one of my roads, and then I've got to measure things out just so that this doesn't overshoot on the other end. So you might wind up with a situation something like this, where you've got your on-ramp and then another road. Now, as I said earlier, you need to place those cars. If you're not playing with missions, that's really the way that you're going to win the game. You place a car if you've placed the first road above or below an opponent's road. And sometimes if you're able to cross two roads at the same time, you might place a couple of cars on there. In fact, one of the missions is a traffic jam. It's trying to get three cars on top of the same road, which is very difficult to do. Players are also going to have a very limited number of these yellow columns, and the yellow columns allow you to break the rules when you're building your column to attach the road. So if you put a yellow column on top, What that means is that this stack can break the rules. It can be more than one up or down. You can attach this right to your on-ramp and put 4 if you want to, and make a super steep road. The other thing that these yellow columns can do is they allow you to create a junction, so you can make a fork in the road. You're allowed to attach 2 of your roads to this one. It does get quite crowded though once you've done that. So you've got the road coming on, and then you can make 2 branches going off if you use one of these yellow cubes. And that does allow you to be quite strategic in terms of the placement of your pieces. Like I said, you do need to be careful about making sure you don't get overhangs. There is conveniently a ruler that came with the game that allows you to measure things out, because you're trying to plan, where am I going to put this so that I can go under my opponent's road and hopefully be the first one to be able to do that. Where should my road end so that I can build an off-ramp onto an airport, for example, because that's one of the missions I want to accomplish. Now, if you do knock things down, this game is a little bit more forgiving. If I knock down my own road or knock my own car off my own highway, no harm, no foul. There's no penalty for that. If I knock down something that an opponent placed, I have to give them one of my columns, and that means I'm going to run out early, and that might cause me to be eliminated from the game. And then all the players work together to replace the parts that got knocked off and keep them as close as possible to where they were before. So you're going to lose these cylinders if you knock your opponent's stuff off, but nothing happens if it's just your own road that gets knocked down. The game even comes with a little pair of tweezers to reach underneath roads and make sure you don't knock more things over while you're trying to clean up a mess. In Tokyo Highway, the game is going to end. Whether you're playing with missions or without, the game ends when one player places all of their cars. If you're not playing a mission, well, the first player to place all their cars is going to be the winner of the game. What skills are you practicing when you play these games? Well, Nekojima is certainly dexterity, eye-hand coordination. We are talking about visual motor skills, visual motor integration, right? It's sort of combining what you see with what your hands are doing. So it is eye-hand coordination. You've got some risk assessment too. In both of these games, I'm going to say, you can't be too impulsive. You need to think about where you're going to place things and place them very carefully. So both games have kind of a self-regulation component, I would say. Like most dexterity games, you get instant feedback if you were moving too fast or you weren't being careful enough. Uh, and so you do have to kind of take a deep breath and have some body awareness and body control. So you're practicing self-regulation skills and trying to avoid being too impulsive in both games. Both games have a dexterity component, but certainly Nekojima is the game that is, this is a pure dexterity game. You know, there's a bit of strategy maybe in terms of who are you giving the cats to and how are you stacking up these pieces, but this is a stacking game that's all about eye-hand coordination and motor dexterity. You have to think about what's the risk of knocking things over when you place one of your denshu, but you know, this is a dexterity game. Now, Tokyo Highway is less focused on dexterity. And I will tell you, when I opened up this box and read the rules, I thought, I don't know if I'm really going to enjoy this game very much. But once you sit down and play through a round or two, you start to realize that it's a game that's very much about resource management and planning, both to be able to place a road so that you can put a car on it, but also being able to place your roads so that you can accomplish missions and earn some points. So there is planning and budgeting of resources, which means that Tokyo Highway does practice those executive functioning skills, the skills and behaviors that you need to work towards a goal. In addition, you've got spatial reasoning. Your visual spatial skills are really being employed here in a way that they're not so much in Nekojima, because you're estimating and you're measuring things out, because you're trying to plan where those roads go so that you can create the route that's going to earn you the most points. Spatial reasoning and visualization is very important, and we do measure visual spatial skills when we're doing IQ testing, so it is an important skill to practice. You might find yourself needing to do some on-the-fly problem solving if another player blocks what you're trying to do. If they get their road underneath another player's road before you can place yours, that means you're not going to get to place a car on there. So there is some flexibility that's required in terms of your strategy in Tokyo Highway. Again, different from Nekojima, which is primarily just dexterity. In Tokyo Highway, you're also involving those fluid reasoning or flexible problem solving skills, that self-monitoring and being able to adjust your approach on the fly. That's another skill that we assess when we're doing psychoeducational assessments. Final thoughts about Nekojima and Tokyo Highway, and who will win? Which is my favorite of the two games? Well, with Nekojima, you've got super fast setup, super easy, straightforward rules to understand. This is an easy game to get to the table and to play. The components are great. They're high quality components. The board, I don't know if you could tell on the little camera, but the board is this super thick and it's solid. You've got the denchu, which are, they're all different sizes, all different lengths of wires, but there's this nice thick yarn that's connecting these two poles. So the components are fantastic. And I will say, I really, really like the addition of this difficulty level meter, where you're drawing the cubes and you're putting them in here as the denchu are placed on the board. I think that's just such a fun addition to dexterity games, because it lets you track, are you improving with practice? Oh, we made it up to level 5. Like that's a pretty awesome, I think, way to play through these games. When my kids were young, we used to play another stacking game. We played Jenga a lot, but because of the age difference, one guy was my older son was more skilled at Jenga than the younger one, and sometimes that would cause some conflict. So we played Jenga cooperatively, and we were just trying to make the tower as tall as it could be. But I think that this is a very elegant way. This little score sheet with the cubes is an elegant way of tracking your difficulty level, whether you're playing co-op or you're playing competitive. The downsides, if you want to call it that, the downside to Nekojima is that I mean, it's a dexterity game. It's a stacking game. There's not a lot of strategy here. There's not a lot of depth. It's meant to be a game that's fast and easy and fun. There's laughs, there's trash talk. It is a dexterity game. So for some players, hardcore gamers might not be as enthusiastic about these kinds of games as I am. I just love them because I think they're fun and funny. They're great fillers. This one has a great table presence too. When we're talking about Tokyo Highway Rainbow City, um, I wasn't sure if I was going to like this one because it's not a pure dexterity game, and I was kind of expecting a game that's more purely about dexterity. But I did, in fact, really quite enjoy this game. The resource management, the planning, and strategy is so different from other dexterity games. I really liked it. The components are great. So you've got wooden bases with wooden pieces that snap into them, so everything's solid. You've got these little rubber pads on the bottom of the roads that keep everything, well, it keeps things from sliding around. So it makes the game, I think, more playable, but it does reduce the requirement for those dexterity skills. The vehicles are kind of soft, rubbery sort of plastic, so they grip onto the roads very well too. But you could have quite a steep road with a car that stays in place, and the roads are going to stay in place because of those rubber pads. The components are great. The downsides of Tokyo Highway are, well, number one, you've got gray columns and gray rows. There's a lot of gray in this game, and it's only the pieces, the features of the city that add that color and add that table presence. It doesn't have the same kind of, well, people will be curious if you're playing this game in a public space, but it doesn't have the same kind of table presence maybe that Nekojima does. But I do really like those city details that add that pop of color and add some strategy to it. Um, Figuring out whether or not you can place a car can be challenging, and it's easy to make mistakes. You've really got to look closely and make sure there's not already another piece that's been placed over or under the road so that you're not supposed to get credit for it. So that can make things more complicated. The focus here is on cars and missions more than dexterity. I thought that was going to be a real downside for me. It wound up not being that because of the strategic elements here that I really liked. Um, so it's a very gray game, but the other components are great and they're nice and colorful. You do have that nice ruler and the tweezers, which I thought was kind of funny. And it's much more about planning and resource management than it is about dexterity. I like both of these games. I think for me, there's more replayability probably for Tokyo Highway because it is complex and there's so many missions that you can do and things can be placed in various ways. It is more strategic. So Tokyo Highway certainly wins out in terms of the replayability factor, maybe. Um, but Nekojima was my favorite of the two. Pure dexterity, a beautiful game, great components, and it has that difficulty meter that I think is a fantastic addition to dexterity games. I haven't seen a game that kept track of things in that way, so simple and easy to keep track. So Nekojima was my preferred game because I love dexterity games. I also really enjoyed Tokyo Highway way more than I thought I would, but it is much more strategic and much more about planning. And that, in a nutshell, is Nekojima versus Tokyo Highway. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the comment section below the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go. Previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the X handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.